All right, want to take a look today at doing what I call a white box test, a black box test for these permissions. In Linux particularly, in TechPrac 5, you set some permissions, and it's a little bit hard to tell, do they work? So in TechPrac 6, you're going to go through a little bit of an exercise if you've looked at TechPrac 6, where you're going to use a script, log in as that user, and try things and see if it works. So a white box test is something like, well, let me look at permissions and see if they're the right kinds of things. A black box test says, well, let me just try it, right? If the door compliance test, if the door is locked, then I'm out. Or I could, maybe ask the supervisor to see a list. That's a white box test. So at any rate, we're going to use some bash script to test access privilege. I've got myself and a link for you available out there in the agenda of some notes just for the commands that I'm going to apply. Don't worry if you didn't call some of your directories, not directories, but groups the same that I did. I just did it this way, and I'm not complete, but I'm going to walk through some things, but show you then what it is that we are looking for. So I've got some notes, and another asset that you'll need is this text access shell script, okay? That really, if you just copy and then put it into textaccess.sh in your VM, you'll be fine. So let me go over into my Linux box and show you where I am. I've kind of gotten started on the assignment as you've done. I've created, and so this is a handy thing, dash big R, small L will show the recursively, and I've really just in my documents folder just have these three folders: alpha dir, beta dir, gamma dir. I've populated the text access shell, and you'll see that in each of those dirs there's a couple of files, and they all have the default permissions, at least in owner, group, user. There's some access control things so you can get that are finer grained, and I might do that as an exercise next term, but you don't have to worry about that. And you should realize now that when I look at this, T. Schultz, that's me, is the user owner. There's also my group that only has me as a default in it, that is the group owner for that. And for AlphaDir right now, I, as the owner and my owner group, have RWX permission, but everybody on the planet, anybody who can log into the system, I should say, not on the planet, has read, control, and execute. Execute is funny. Sometimes it helps if it's a program or a script to give execute permission, but we're mostly worried about read and write. So this is kind of the setting that you had, and there's another. I did cat of etc PASSWD. That was the command I used just to say I've added my A user, B user, C user, and D user in there. And so that's the point. Adding this, I haven't set any permissions. Let's see, where am I going? I'm trying to get back to my notes just to make sure I do things in the right order. So I was just reminding you of this setup. All right, I want to take a quick look at this, and I'm just going to copy this. I want to take a quick look at this shell script. Now, you don't have to work with this test access shell script, but it's pretty clever in the way it uses some of the scripting capabilities in Linux, and we could have done something similar in Windows. And so the way this script is going to get executed is, if you wanted to test access to AlphaDir for a user, you would use this particular command. And we'll get back into in a little bit, well, gosh, what is that command about? But let's look at the script first. And so the $1 parameter when you run the script will be the directory within wherever you are. So it's important that you get in your documents folder if that's where alpha dir, gamma dir, and beta, alpha, beta, and gamma dirs are. I'm just you're not. It's not a system requirement, but that's just make sure you're in the right working directory. And so $1 is going to be the name of the directory we're testing, and $user is the person who is currently logged in. So we're going to log in as that user, a user, and then we'll do it for B, C, and D. And then we're going to try to list the directory, and then the script will report, well, was that user able to list files in that directory or not? And depending on what the requirement was, in some cases they should have permission to do this, in some cases they shouldn't. It's going to check if that user can change to that directory. You might remember that for a directory, the execute lets you list, but I think you need to be able to read to change directory to it. Then it's going to try to read a file in that directory, okay, and then report back if it works or not. And so this, remember this notation or this syntax, we're trying a command, and if that command works, then it's reporting back, okay, they can read a file. It's going to try to see if they can create a file in that folder. Then it's going to try to append to a file that's already there. But in fact, what I wanted to do was, and I have the wrong version of the script, at the end it does do a delete. I'm going to Control K. But I got rid of that. Let's go here. But if you highlight all this, I commented out the delete because if you delete the file, then it's not there if you want to test later. And if you try to put it back, well, then it gets put back based on the user that put it back. So no biggie, but I commented out having the person delete it. And you might remember that a comment has a pound sign in it. So you don't need to understand the script, but I'm going to go back and copy this command. That's right, I was now back to my notes. And let's talk about this command here. Got to the wrong place. All right, so you might know that the SU command says do the command as another user, okay? And that other user is a user at the end. And the -C just says I'm going to run this, but it's really going to run the text access alpha dir, but it's going to run it as a user. So what you ought to take away from this, to test this directory with this user, that would be the syntax of your command. And when you execute that, it's going to ask for a password. This isn't your sudo admin password. This would be whatever password you set up for a user. Okay, and so the script then reports testing. It's pretty self-explanatory in what it returns, and so I'm providing it kind of more as a tool for you, not something that you need to fiddle with. But it's saying, okay, I'm testing this particular user. Access to this particular directory, and it turns out that a user was able to list files. A user can move into the directory. A user can read a file, but a user can't create a file or append to a file. Okay, and that's okay. That's the kind of the default permissions. We had them back here. Oh, I cleared. Let me do this. This again, and so that was the default permissions in AlphaDir, that anybody, because it's this particular group, anybody could read, but nobody could write, couldn't write to the files, and couldn't add to, they didn't have write permission on the directory. Okay, if you go back to the assignment, that's not the correct permissions for A in terms of AlphaDir. If you go back and you have to go then look at TechPrac 4 for this, a user in AlphaDir, I'm sorry, it would be TechPrac 5, we're doing 6 now. In TechPrac 5, a user should have a user and C user cannot access a AlphaDir or any of its files, right? So I haven't done the work yet, so let me get that accomplished. And let me take the time just to do it a little bit step by step. And if you did it a little differently in yours, then that's what I decided as a way to do that. Now it is asking my sudo. I created a group called alpha deny, and I'm going to put a user and B user, or excuse me, a user and C user in there, and then make that the group, the group owner for those files. I think I can now, let me try to do several of these. I don't know if it will let me do multiple or not. We can do them one by one then. It's going to be there we are. I had clicked read only. So what those two commands did, I put a user in this alpha deny group, put C user in this alpha deny group, and this getInt group alpha deny just confirms to me that I've got alpha user or a user and C user are both in that group. So that created that group. Back to what it said for, and I'm only doing AlphaDir, and we'll get to what your assignment is. You probably have done this, and if you've done it right, no worries, but if you haven't got it right, then when you test it, then the proof will come out in the pudding. What that did was set for AlphaDir and every file in AlphaDir that others have read, write, execute access to that particular folder and its contents. So don't forget you do the folder and the contents. And what these commands are going to do is change the ownership, group ownership for AlphaDir and all the files in AlphaDir to this group alpha deny. So it's this kind of going around process of saying, okay, if we have a group of people that we want to have different access than rank and file, others, then put them in a group and make sure that then that group gets the right permissions. And so far, now I'm setting the permissions for the group. I assigned that group, but I haven't said, well, what permissions? The G equal nothing, as you probably learned somewhere or had to apply already, says that they have no permissions. So this is basically saying the group ownership members of AlphaDir don't have any permissions for AlphaDir. All right. And as I said, what we ended up doing, or when you turned in your results for TechPrac 05, or the one you've done already, or if you got an extension, you're working on it, you just kind of told me what was what the permissions were, and I can inspect this list. Remember the ls-lr, and again, I've only gotten the AlphaDir done. You've got to figure out, did you get your beta and gamma dir? But if I look at it, I see that, okay, for the directory AlphaDir, the group is alpha deny, and I see the 3 dashes here, and then everybody in the world has RWX. So at a glance, that looks like the right thing as long as the alpha deny group has a user and C user in it. Here, this getInt group with this funny notation here, and it was in your assignment. What that does is substitute for the group name whatever group has been assigned to AlphaDir, and this says substitute for the group name whatever group names have been assigned to the files. So a way to, the fact that this is alpha deny is just repeating this and that, but I didn't have to type in alpha deny. And so if you didn't call that group, some kind of saw group one or main group or something. So if your group name is different, it's not a requirement that you call it alpha deny. That's just where I was headed. So this is what I call a white box test. We can inspect all this and say, gee, it seems to me that everybody in AlphaDir, everybody can read, write, execute, except for those that are in the group, and that group happens to be alpha deny, and alpha deny contains these members, A user and C user. So it's a lot of thinking that has to go on there, and if we make some changes and then we have to go back and check, that's a little bit harder. So I'm going to now go back to, and it might be here in the hopper, rather than have to look at all that, if you run this test access for a user on AlphaDir, and again, the password there is the password, PW, I made a capital P, little w, whatever password is for a user. So now I'm getting something that tells me more directly what I want. We're testing a user's access to AlphaDir. Can't even open the directory. Prevented from changing to the directory. Prevented from reading a file. Prevented from creating a file. Prevented from appending a file. So that kind of gives me some confidence that, okay, a user has the right behavior with respect to AlphaDir. And if I want to test somebody else, like duser, duser's password. Now duser we haven't done anything to. That's just kind of a generic other user throughout this assignment. So duser can list those things and can change files and add. In fact, originally, and I should have shown this, duser wouldn't have been allowed to append or create a file in that folder. But so by putting this for duser, this gives me some confirmation that this other user can do anything that they need to. They have read, write, and execute access. So it's a script then that directly tests what's going on, and it kind of uses the su command to log in as that user and try some things. Now, one thing I suggest in the assignment, or would like you to do, if you wanted to test, we have 4 users we're testing and 3 directories, so that would give you 12 different tests you needed to run. So if you look in the assignment, what I asked you to do then is, let's go back to here on, back one more, in good old TechPrac 6. Come on. Oh, I had a little flaky internet earlier, and yeah, it seems okay. Good. It seems to have come around. What I suggest you do is create a script, usertests.sh, which tests for one user all 3 folders. Anything you can do as a system admin to save yourself typing time, and also making mistakes. And if in a couple of weeks, something's changed and we fiddled with our settings, and we want to be sure that this is still working. This is kind of like a regression test in like in C#, or a test, kind of a test plan, something we sort of have recorded the tests and we can do that. So what this one is, it's going to execute this test access but it's going to do it for all three directories. And then there is sort of that funny syntax until you unravel. And I'm only going to get this much. Now realize I haven't yet set up gamma-dir and beta-dir to be the appropriate protection, just alpha-dir. And it's going to go back in here. And so if I do that, what it's going to do is it's going to do user tests as a user. And what we got was very quickly and without mistakes. I mean, you could have done this SU yourself and logged in and try things and that, but what this does is it checked alpha-dir, and then it checked beta-dir and tried everything and checked gamma-dir, right? So your job is, well, in addition, to kind of putting all this together, installing the one script I gave you, make this other script that I asked you to make. Your job's going to be, well, do I have my permissions right? Okay, are they obeying what it is? And if we go back and look, I've gotten used to them. Let's go back to TechPrac 5 is where they're listed. That A user and B user can RWX gamma-dir, but nobody else can access gamma-dir. We leave the owner alone. Okay, so the others can't. A user and B user can. A user and C user can't get an alpha-dir, but everybody else can RWX it. And there's nothing said really about beta-dir. I'm sorry, others have R-X permission on beta-dir. So, I have no idea what that is. And so, your job is in 5 to be sure your permissions are right. And then once you have them right, what you're going to turn into me is you're going to run this particular script. Well, you're going to do it 3 times, one for each user, the user tests. And pipe the results into a file. And you still get some of the permissions denied that pop out on the screen, but in the file, it will have the comments, and you can check those and make sure that they're the right thing. And so it's really just an example of using scripting to do what they sometimes call a regression testing too. By saving this, you can execute it. Think of a system with hundreds of users and thousands of file-based assets, and maybe we've reconfigured something and made some changes, opened up. How are we sure that we haven't undone something that should be done? You can run these and then you automate them just to report, well, gosh, you thought they shouldn't access, and they can. We're inspecting it to see how it goes, but even the expectations. I expected this to be denied and it wasn't. I should alert that something that you expected is no longer the case. All right, so just a little bit of using script to take care of it all, and I think I will end the comments there.